Hi everyone, we're here at Codecamp 2017 in Yash, and I've got Peter Lawrey here with me, and we're just gonna chat a bit about your session, because I think you just came out of your session just a few minutes ago, and you talked about microservices and low latency and all that. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, so what I'm doing is I'm taking my experience from trading systems and looking at the way microservices are used, and see what they can learn from each other. So microservices in particular are good design models, good naming conventions, transparency, ease of use, better deployment models and development models. Yeah. So there's a lot to learn from microservices. But on the trading side, they've solved some of the problems which microservices are still struggling with, such as how do I test and deploy these things? How do I debug them? How do I make them perform and get very low latency? So that's what I'm trying to bring those two worlds together.
Yeah, well, but they sound quite contradictory because when you kind of think the trading systems, maybe you can explain what is really the critical element of a trading system from in terms of constraints and performance. What makes it so special?
Okay, so one of the areas that particularly there's an overlap that I think is special is that one of the things that makes microservices different from, say, service-oriented architecture is the independent deployability. Mm-hmm. And banks have systems that talk to other banks, which talk to other banks, and so on. Every one of those teams works completely independently on their own release cycles. They're using their own technology. They have to define very clear interfaces between each other, but they've been doing independent deployability for decades. Mm-hmm. Right, so that's where I think there's something to learn from that in particular, but that independent deployability. Mm-hmm.
And do you think the other way around? Do you think people coming from a microservices background, what do you think is their biggest takeaway from trading systems? Do they have something that they can learn from that?
So one of the key things is. For me, is that one of the challenges of microservices is testing and debugging. Mm-hmm. Much harder to do than in a monolith, which is why some people are reluctant to do that. So what I advocate is create a model where you can deploy it either as a monolith or as a microservice by adding a transport. So you build up business components, you add a transport, now you've got a microservice. So, but if that transport isn't helping you, in particular when it comes to testing and debugging, it doesn't generally, don't use the transport. Just test that the business logic works. If you've got multiple business logic components, wire them all together as a monolith, show that they all function correctly, then treat the deployment into separate services as a separate exercise. It's a deployment issue, not necessarily a development issue.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. It precludes, of course, that you're using like a similar type of language or deployment platform where you could deploy things together. But I think that's a great point indeed. I think one of the elements that always fascinated me also about the whole trading system thing is the whole discussion about mechanical sympathy and really developing a solid understanding of the underlying hardware. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so particularly one of the constraints if you're looking at, say, in the web space is that you don't want to add delays that annoy people, but a bit more fundamentally, you don't want to add delays people can see. Mm-hmm. Right? Anything faster than a human can see probably doesn't matter so much anymore, except from a scalability. Like if you're doing enough operations enough times, if it adds up to something, you can see it starts to matter. But if that threshold is about 40 milliseconds. 40 milliseconds is the refresh rate of a movie cinema. You can't see that screen updating at 40 milliseconds, about 24 frames a second.
Yes, indeed.
So anything faster than that is fast enough, right? But in trading systems, we actually care about latencies you can't see by another 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. So it's usually, a lot of systems are around a millisecond, some of them are around 0.1 milliseconds. So now you can't just look at a system and say whether it's going fast enough or not. You need to also write the tools that monitor the system and say, is it going fast enough and why isn't it going fast enough? Which operations were taking too long? All of this you can't see. So you actually have to develop your your testability as alongside your application itself to ensure that it's not only correct but it performs fast enough. Another thing that's slightly different in trading systems compared to, say, a web system is that in a web system the priority is to deliver service and maybe fall back from delivering service. One of the catches in financial system is if it's not performing fast enough, you can be losing your money. In which case, you can actually be better off not running at all than run too slow.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It
you lose
seems
no
counterintuitive, though.
Yeah, well, you lose no money if it's not running, generally. Whereas if it's running too slowly, you could be just losing money all day and everyone else is just picking you off. So that can be worse than running.
Absolutely fascinating. So, is it your first time that you're here in Yash and at Codecamp, or have you been here before?
It's my first time in Yash and Codecamp. I really like it. It's a very green city. I particularly like that.
Did you have the time to explore a little bit?
A little bit, but enough to say that I'd like it. Usually for the last few years I've been coming into Cluj, and I really enjoyed that as well. Conferences there. It's got a similar university vibe, and I really like that atmosphere and enthusiasm from the attendees.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, it was a pleasure to have you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Hope to see you again at Codecamp.
Cheers. Yes, definitely.